grandfather, and good friends. For those of you who do not know, I'm his kid brother. It is his misfortune to have a brother like me, and it was my good fortune to have a brother like him. He was a very, very caring, gracious person, highly intelligent, and profoundly compassionate person. He was 7.5 years older than I am, but he was light years ahead of me in many other aspects of his life. Of all the achievements and good qualities in life, what I thank him the most is for having been will continue to be my big brother. I take comfort knowing that he and his wife for 60 plus years had a good life. They lived well, they raised a beautiful family, and we all thank them for that. At this time, I would like to make a mention of my two nieces, Anne and Alice, and their spouses, John and Adrian. John's not here. And grandfather and all the grandchildren of his. For taking good care of him in his last days, and for the few tasks of all the works that they need to do at the end of one's life. Again, I'd like to thank every one of you again, and we will talk about how good the person was. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. My name is Jonah Woolley. This is my brother Theo. We are the sons of Ann Kim and the grandsons of Yong. Our grandfather was born March 6th, 1935 in Incheon, South Korea. The firstborn son in a long line of firstborn sons, he was adored from birth by his parents and his 3 older sisters.
In primary school, our grandfather stood out as a brilliant scholar. He liked to credit his older sisters, who cut short their own educations to support their family, with encouraging him to focus on academics. Despite being from the modest town of Incheon, rather than sophisticated Seoul, our grandfather was admitted to Gyeonggi High School, the oldest and most prestigious high school in Korea. His education was interrupted by the Korean War, but he passed the test for admission to Seoul National University's medical school. Our grandfather was always very proud of achieving the KS mark, Gyeonggi and Seoul of academic excellence.
As a young man in Seoul, our grandfather was asked to tutor a friend's cousin, and they fell in love with the student's aunt, our grandmother, Yong Park. They married in January 1961, and our uncle, Seok-jung, was born later that year. 4 years later, our mother, Hyung-jung, was born. In 1967, after he completed service in Vietnam War as a head of a MASH unit, our grandfather and his family emigrated to the U.S. to pursue a medical training in radiology. Our aunt, Ho-jung, was born a few years later in Lorain, Ohio.
Our grandfather's radiology career led the Kim family to settle in Buffalo, New York, Lexington, Kentucky, and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. In the mid-1990s, our grandfather retired from practice and moved to Northern Virginia. Our grandfather had an active social life in retirement. He golfed once or twice a week, hiked Great Falls Park every Saturday, swam laps at the local YMCA, and met friends for brunch or lunch several times a month. Our grandfather had so many friend groups that he started giving them funny nicknames. The Buckeyes for his Ohio friends, the Bills for his Buffalo friends, and the Steelers for his Pittsburgh friends.
I remember 8 years ago when I was starting at American University in Washington, D.C. Grandpa helped me move my boxes and luggage into my freshman dorm room. One of my classmates in the hallway saw us and asked me, "Is that your father?" She was being completely serious, even though my grandfather was 80 at the time. When I later told Grandpa what my classmate had asked, my grandpa said in response, "Why didn't you tell them I was your brother?" That's how I remember my grandpa, as someone who always helped and who was always having a great sense of humor.
사랑해요, 할아버지.
Hi everyone, I'm Anne, the older daughter. Thank you for coming through the rain and without daylight savings time to come here. I'm sorry for the bad weather and for the darkness, but I'm so happy that you're all here today. We want to celebrate the life of the man that I was lucky enough to call Appa. It's hard to write a eulogy for someone whose life story is as rich as my father's. In many ways, his story was like a fairy tale. As the first son after 3 girls, he was adored from birth like a mini Buddha. He went to the finest schools in Korea and married a beautiful and kind woman, my mother. Together, they produced 3 healthy, smart, and successful children and 9 adored grandchildren. He made a good living as a radiologist and was able to earn enough money to give his family a very comfortable life. Upon retiring to Northern Virginia, he found a wide circle of friends, all of whom I'm seeing right now, with whom he shared many laughs and memories. I want to thank every one of you for giving my parents, and especially my father, so many happy years. But every fairy tale has its dark side. Along with all of his blessings, my father faced many challenges in his life. Challenges that I know many of you also faced. Living as second-class citizens under the Japanese occupation, suffering chaos and poverty when Japan surrendered and abandoned Korea, losing both his father and his younger sister at a young age, experienced the horrors and deprivations of the Korean War, then experiencing more horrors and more suffering in the Vietnam War, leaving his beloved country behind to seek a better life for his family in the U.S., where again he was treated like a second-class citizen at times due to language barriers and discrimination. Growing up, I didn't know anything about Appa's life before the United States. He was mostly a quiet presence in our family. He went to work in the morning, came home in the evening, and hardly spoke a word at the dinner table. Maybe it was because my mother and siblings and I were so talkative, he couldn't get a word in edgewise. Or maybe he was tired after a long day of looking at x-rays and diagnosing people with cancer. Or maybe it was just his quiet personality. But for whatever reason, Appa was always a supporting player in our family and never the star. But that changed when my brother passed away. That was by far the worst thing that happened to our family, and it destroyed my mother. But Appa was strong and steady as usual. He cared for my mother in her final years, cooking for her, feeding her, making sure she was safe. As Appa's friend Tom Wentling wrote in a note, his devotion to our mother was the very definition of love. During those long days and weeks and months of caring for my mother, Appa finally opened up and started to tell us the stories of his life. How his whole family nearly died of typhus, which killed his father. How he learned English by translating articles from American magazines for Korean Reader's Digest. How he passed the Seoul National University entrance exam even though he dropped out of high school in 10th grade. But my favorite story was probably the one of how my mother and her girlfriend basically chased my father all the way up near the North Korea border while he was on military duty to convince him to marry her. say that my father died of grief after my mother died. And while that's a romantic story, I don't think it's actually true. Appa was a devoted husband, but he was also a man of many interests and many friends. After years of isolation due to COVID and my mother's illness, Appa was finally able to enjoy his life again. In the past year and a half, Dad had some of the best times of his life. Attending the Harvard reunion where he was treated like a VIP. That picture that we have of him wearing the top hat, that's from the Harvard reunion. Going to Cape Cod with Alice's family and me, which he declared the best vacation ever. Visiting New York City and catching up with old friends. Exploring Great Falls Park every Saturday with his hiking club and going out to lunch afterwards. Spending a weekend retreat in Virginia Beach with his George Mason University philosophy professor and classmates. Seeing his grandsons graduate from Michigan and Georgetown this past spring. And so many more memories. Appa and I were even planning a trip to Korea this fall with his philosophy professor to visit ancient classic sites, but we had to cancel when he got too sick. Of course, I am beyond sad to lose my beloved father, but I am also grateful for his stories, for the legacy he leaves behind in his 9 grandchildren, and for the strength and steadiness that he always showed me and our family. There is a new star in the sky, and that star is my father. Hello everyone, thank you for coming. I'm Alice Hojong, youngest daughter of my dad. Thank you all for coming today to celebrate the life of our dad, who we always knew was a great man, but who we have learned so profoundly, especially since he passed away, how beloved he was. It is a shame that memorial services take place after someone passes away, an event that takes place with so many friends and family present who tell stories of how remarkable and special you were. I think it is safe to say many people would love to have one last opportunity to be with so many loved ones, singing your praises and toasting in your honor. Coincidentally, back in September, as my sister Anne and I were here taking care of our dad, we happened to watch a silly Netflix romantic comedy called Love at First Sight. One of the main characters was flying home to London to attend the memorial service of his mother, who was dying of lung cancer, but wanted to be present at her own celebration of life. It was a little too close to reality of what was happening in our lives, our dad battling a disease that attacks the lungs, and the possibility of him dying and having to plan a memorial service. Our dad actually said that he did not want a memorial service or any type of funeral proceedings. He was the type of person who would not have wanted to attend his own memorial reception, as he was not one who desired a whole lot of fuss made over him or desired to be the center of attention. This was quintessentially who Dad was, an unbelievably accomplished gentleman who never put himself first, never cared for recognition, never allowed himself to be the victim, never wavered from being true to himself. As my nephews have spoken about Dad's many accomplishments, my sister shared the comment of our dad's friend who acknowledged how he was the most devoted husband. He was also a devoted father who supported all of his children's needs and wants, even if it meant he didn't get to drive a fancy Mercedes-Benz like most of his fellow Korean doctor friends, or that he didn't travel to Europe until decades after all 3 of his children were first afforded those opportunities. We didn't hear about his incredible life in Korea until we were in our 40s and 50s, gaining admission to prestigious schools despite only having had
a formal education through the 10th grade. His almost comical honor of being drafted into military service to join the American forces because of his exemplary studies at Seoul National University Medical School. Dad didn't divulge the disappointments in his life, as he never played the victim. But as I got older, and he did too, he was more forthcoming about the trials and tribulations during his lifetime. One story he told me was that when Korea was occupied by Japan, his last name of Kim was translated to Kane in Japanese, which both meant gold. But since Japanese last names were multisyllabic, they added the suffix of Yama, so his new last name was Kaneyama, which roughly translated to Gold Mountain or Goldberg. He joked that was probably why he loved the Jewish Reuben sandwich so much. Once I moved to Omaha, I was so excited to tell my dad that the Reuben sandwich was created there and not New York City, as some people claimed. When Dad visited us in Omaha in the summer of 2021, we took him to the original Blackstone Hotel location, which is now a fancy Kimpton hotel, and they now have a restaurant that serves a modern version of the original Reuben sandwich. Dad said it was the best one he ever had. Dad loved Omaha. In fact, at one point, he and my mom were going to move here to a 55-plus community. He told me that Omaha felt like real America. He praised the beautiful open spaces, the bucolic neighborhood I lived in, the friendly people, and of course, the steaks. He loved going to the Drover, which is a famous Omaha steakhouse, which is known for its whiskey-marinated steaks, salad bar, and 70s style of decor. Perhaps he loved it so much as it was reminiscent of the chain restaurant Steak and Ale, which was a favorite of our families where we celebrated our birthdays when we lived in Buffalo in the 1970s. While Dad spent most of his lifetime putting others first, his last few years he was finally able to do the things he wanted to do. He put himself first in many ways. He changed his mind about moving to Omaha, citing he wasn't ready to leave his friends and life in Virginia. He pushed back when we asked him to come visit during the holidays, citing it was a hassle to travel. He sometimes even requested that we didn't come visit because he didn't want to disrupt his routine life of meeting up with friends, hiking, doing what he loved to do. But I know he also never wanted to feel like a burden, claiming that despite our wanting to take care of him, he didn't want to live like that. There was one time, however, that I practically insisted he come visit us in Omaha, and he resisted a bit since it was winter time, and it was shortly after my mom had passed away in January of 2022. My sister and I hated for him to be alone, so I invited Dad to come to Omaha in February and told him that I had a surprise. The Broadway tour of the musical The Fiddler on the Roof was coming to Omaha, and I bought tickets and wanted him to come see it. So going back to our Jewish roots, when my sister and I were young, our dad took us to see The Fiddler on the Roof at the cinema. It was sometime late in 1971, and I was not even 2 years old, and my sister was around 7 years of age. The story is that I was crying and complaining so much that he had to leave the theater and didn't get to watch the whole movie. Eventually, he saw the whole film, and he was a lifelong fan of the story and the famous music. Despite all our music lessons and cultural education, my parents hardly splurged on things like tickets to the symphony, opera, or Broadway shows. I was afraid he would say no, but to my delight, he accepted and flew to Omaha, where we got to enjoy some of his favorite meals and to see Fiddler on the Roof. While it's not exactly a blueprint of my dad's life, in the end, it's a story about a father and his daughters and the choices we make in life, the ups and downs in marriage, the happy and the sad times in our lives, leaving the old country for a new one. My dad lived a full life with hardly a complaint, but with incredible grace, humility, and meaning. Sunrise, sunset to my dad, my hero.